My Magical Boyfriend, Part 3. I set the table in our ex-coffee shop, now turned apartment, while I waited for my boyfriend. He's a little different than any of my other boyfriends. Erato works in Oklahoma City, but he lives here in Vegas with me. How, you might ask? Erato commutes, but he doesn't do it the normal way. I don't know how he does it, but he travels through flat screens. His name is Erato, and he's Greek, and he works on the shopping network, selling everything from jewelry to mountain bikes to exercise equipment. He's magic to listen to. I figured out his secret. He's a wizard. I'm Ash Wilkes. As normal is, as normal does. In my spare time, I cook. I love creating new dishes, especially for Erato. He loves eating them. It's barely 10:30 in the morning, on a Saturday, and Erato specifically said we needed to eat a light brunch. Erato hadn't arrived home yet, so I opened up my laptop and Googled his name, just like I'd done 100 times before. Erato was a fairly common name for girls, but a lot of men had the same name as well. Stenos was not as common a name. I don't know why I hadn't thought about it before, but my search parameters were Erato, Stenos, historical figures, and scholar. A result popped up that surprised me. There was one name, a man's name, but was jammed together. An ancient historical figure of some note, Eratosthenes, the librarian of the great library of Alexandria from 2,000 years ago, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The library, that is, not the man. Not to be confused with the famed lighthouse of Alexandria. The library and the lighthouse were both built in Alexandria, and were both considered wonders of the ancient world. Both buildings were built more than 2,000 years ago, the one to alert incoming boats to the dangers of Pharos, while the others became a place of famed scholarship until Julius Caesar allegedly, or was it accidentally, burned it down. The surviving part of the great building was later converted into a Christian church. Much of the library's knowledge about science, math, the arts, and the arcane sciences were written on fragile scrolls. None have survived the millennia. A crinkling paper noise interrupted me. Erato stood behind me, holding the remains of a burger, and stood over my shoulder, reading the web page. "So you think I'm him?" Erato said, with a big grin. Before the moment got away from us, I half stood and pulled Erato to me and kissed him. That was the deal. Erato would stay with me. Every day I kissed him. Just like every kiss I had with this man, it tingled, and I'm sure stars blazed around our heads. He left me breathless and in awe, and my mind sparked with ideas. As we pulled apart, he said, "Something smells good, and the place looks great." "It's coming together," I said, bragging a little, flirting a lot. "Hope you're hungry. Homemade grilled chicken nuggets with an apricot dipping sauce, roast carrots in a rosemary butter sauce, and summer squash fried in garlic and ghee. For dessert, blondies with cherries on top and vanilla ice cream. Why do you want us to leave so early?" Erato's smile took a moment to arrive, and when it did, I kissed his nose. For a moment, I wondered if something was bothering my wizard boyfriend. Was it me looking him up on the web? "I want to spend the day with you," he said, "and the night, but we don't have time." To keep myself from blushing, I changed the conversation, so I said, "You're looking pretty good for a guy who has passed his 2,000th birthday." Though Erato smiled, a shadow remained. "What can I say?" Erato asked. "Guys like you keep me young. Wait a moment, are you trying to seduce me?" I took his hand, led him to the table, and pulled his chair out for him. His exuberant smile returned. I took one last look at him and innocently flirted. Is having homemade chicken nuggets for a special brunch against the rules? I'm completely fed up with rules, Erato mumbled. What's wrong? I asked. The shadow returned to his eyes immediately, and his smile flickered. But he said, You and I, let's make our own rules. I had a feeling I had better leave this topic alone. Erato would talk about it when he was ready. I hope. I went to the kitchen and brought out the food. The chicken had already rested and cooled. Erato did the honors by dividing the chicken nuggets into 2 piles. One for me, one for him. I served the carrots and summer squash and gave us both a little bowl of the dipping sauce. I left the cherry-covered blondies in the fridge until later. Halfway through dinner, I set my utensils down and asked, What can I do to help? What do you mean? Erato asked, quickly cutting a squash into smaller pieces. Something is bothering you, I stated. Since we're boyfriends, we can talk about things like this. Was it me making connections with the Library of Alexandria and discovering your Eratosthenes, the great librarian? No, Erato said. You have to admit, I look pretty good for 2000. Don't even have a wrinkle, and most people would swear I hadn't made it to 1500. I chuckled and said, Really? No, Erato laughed as he said, If word got out, everyone would want my autograph, and my big brothers would tease me forever. Keep looking. Then Eratosthenes is not you? I asked. His flirty smile returned, and he said, Dad says I'm a primal force of love, baby, and Mom always says my heart is too big for my chest, and it's going to get me in trouble someday. My stepmom doesn't like me, says I'm too much like my dad because I can't settle down. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Because you kissed me today, I'm here for you. Let's hurry and eat because we have a time limit. This early? Where to? I asked. Do you like opera? My uncle has his final show tonight. He's an Italian singer that made a name for himself a few years ago when he sang on stage with Pavarotti. Erato said. I don't know much about opera, but who is your uncle? Paolo de Lucia, Erato said. It's the final performance for The Barber of Seville. You'll like him. Besides, I've got free tickets, and since he's my uncle, I've also got backstage passes. Erato held up 2 tickets. Even I have heard of him, I said. How big is your family? My family is big enough to need the Superdome for family gatherings, and famous enough to perform for presidents and kings and corporate bigwigs. My oldest brother, Cal, has been the royal advisor for a very noble, very rich Arabian family for generations, Erato said. Then he's a wizard like you, I asked. Not exactly, and yes, exactly. You might meet him tonight, Erato said and smiled. Halfway through dinner, I sat up, suddenly horrified. Erato was not taking me on one of those little dates where we see a movie, but this was a big date, one that would cost some serious moolah. I swallowed. My mouth felt like somebody had stuffed it with cotton, and finally I said, What do you wear to something like this? Aren't you supposed to wear a really nice suit? What about parking? We should have left a couple of hours ago. I've never been to Opera Las Vegas. Do they even have a matinee performance? Parking won't be a problem because we're not going to Opera Las Vegas. And as to clothes, let me look in your closet, Erato said, excusing himself, but he had a quirky smile. I don't care how much he denied it. Somehow he and the ancient Eratosthenes were connected, and that connection involved magic. Terrified was the word to describe my frantic heart. I would be meeting some of Erato's family, and that terrified me. His half-brother heir was nice enough, and the little he had mentioned of his brothers kind of left me on edge, especially what he had said about Cal, his oldest brother. Oh my God, Erato was looking through my closet. What would Erato think when he saw how poor I lived? Erato worked at the shopping network, which meant he must make hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. Then again, Erato already knew how poor I was. He even found us this run-down coffee shop to live in, a place that had become home to both of us. Still, I didn't own anything nice enough for a high-class event like an opera. Erato wouldn't find anything. Will this do? Erato said, walking out of our bedroom. Look what I found in your closet. Mind if I wear it? The man had gone in carrying nothing, but emerged looking like a model. He wore a custom-fitted, slim-lined suit that hugged his body in all the right places. The man wore only black, like the black shirt and the black shimmery tie, accented with a silver chain around his left wrist. Where did you find that? I asked, completely gobsmacked. Oh, this? Right next to the other one I found in the back of your closet, he said, smiling. Who knew you owned custom-tailored Fendi suits? You know they only make those in Italy, right? It was only then I realized that he was holding a second, matching, custom Fendi suit. Both were very formal and looked very expensive. That's not one of mine, I said. Then I kicked myself. Erato the wizard was showing off again. Somehow he had created them out of nothing. Tonight is your night, he said. We need to be home by midnight, which is in about 4.5 hours Italian time. Bring your passport. Are you my fairy godmother or something? I asked. Let's leave it at something, he said, winking at me. Once I was dressed in the Fendi suit, Erato styled my hair and somehow made me look as good as he did. Once ready, we stood in front of the flat screen, and he held my hand tight. Don't let go, Erato said, glee filling his eyes. If you do, who knows where you'll end up? Where are we going? I asked. Rome, Erato said. Step forward, but keep your arms and elbows inside the ride at all times. This is the fun part. Erato pulled me forward, staring at me intently. I stepped forward and was immediately surrounded by thousands of images. My brain couldn't make sense of all of them. Castles, movie sets, living rooms, random places on the street. The Eiffel Tower? Was that London Bridge? We emerged into a room surrounded by hundreds of flat screens and televisions and tube televisions from 60 years ago and monitors of every size and shape. Some were as old as those seen in museums. The furniture was eclectic and as mishmash as the rest of the room. A simple bed, but covered in hippie pillows, several dozen chairs that didn't match, with strange pillows as well, a couple of work tables with odd gadgets covering them. An ancient bookcase stood out, filled with antique books and scrolls. I have something I want you to keep safe, Erato said, quickly walking over to a glass shelf filled with odd pieces of crystals and keys. You live here? I asked. When I'm not living with you, Erato said. He picked up a small scroll, barely the size of the palm of my hand. Something sad came over his face, and when he spoke, I don't think he was talking to me. This is my refuge. I deal with so many people every day, I need a place completely separate from the world to recharge. Don't get me wrong, I love what I do, but sometimes people are draining. People always take and take and take, expecting the well never to run dry. I guess I've run dry, or soon will. Keep this safe. I took the small scroll, looked at it, and asked, What is it? A love letter, Erato said. In a lost room surrounded by televisions, Erato seemed vulnerable. Maybe he only allowed this side of himself to come out in his safe spot. For a moment, my wizard seemed human, with human feelings. He dared not feel safe anywhere, not even at our place. Only here. We barely knew each other, yet Erato trusted me with the deepest part of himself. Or maybe he finally needed to trust somebody, and that was me. I walked up behind him, tucked the small scroll into my pocket, and wrapped my arms around Erato and lightly squeezed. His hand went up to my arm and held it a moment. "Have you shown this place to anybody else?" I whispered. "A lot of people know this room exists, but nobody can get in here," Erato said, trying to smile. "Grandma made it, but she gave it to me when she retired." "Your grandma is a wizard too?" I asked. "That would be downgrading her abilities," Erato said. "Then why tell me about this place?" I asked. Erato turned around and lightly kissed me. The electricity was there. He leaned his forehead on mine and lightly kissed my nose. "We need to get going or we will be very late." Did Erato mean what I think he meant? I think so. Once again, he took my hand and we walked into the nearest flat screen. The world sped past me, and in seconds the sky darkened to sunset, and suddenly we stepped out of a television and into a room draped in scarlet and gold. To be honest, Erato stepped out. I fell out, dizzy, only to be caught in Erato's arms. "Just relax," Erato said. "I've got you. First time traveling like this can get to you." My hands were literally shaking, and my stomach threatened to turn inside out. "Breathe," Erato said, but he was smiling. "You're going to be fine." I forced myself to breathe and said, "Is that before or after I puke all over your shoes?" "Not going to happen. Ash, calm down and take several deep breaths," Erato ordered, tapping my back. "First time is always the worst," a nearby voice said. "Ash, my boy, have a mint. They always settle my stomach." A small lozenge was suddenly thrust into my mouth. The scent and taste of peppermint overwhelmed all my senses, and my stomach calmed down. "Grandma?" Erato asked. "You came?" "First class all the way," she said, looking through her large, gaudy purse. "Only the young can tolerate the insanity of televisions. I prefer my chauffeur." She was a tall, slim woman with a frizz of silver hair about her head and wearing a light turquoise, full-sleeved evening gown. She pulled a small bottle out of her purse, opened it, and ordered, "Ash, sip. It's brandy, and we'll have you right as rain." It was brandy, all right, but smoother, with an inner fire. Something about this vintage smelled of the cleanness of spring meadows, and the morning dawn, and of the new grapes of summer. Grandma had the expensive kind of brandy. I took a deep breath, then a large sip, and passed the small bottle back, and immediately relaxed. My world had become perfect. Erato suddenly stood behind me, his arms wrapped loosely about my chest. With brandy like that as my inspiration, imagine the dishes I could create. Imagine how good today's chicken would have turned out. I took another deep breath and listened to the recipes and ideas sing through my brain. "He'll be all right," Grandma said. "Paolo arranged a box near the stage, but I'm going to be lonely by myself. Would you two care to join an old lady? It's been a while since two strapping young gentlemen sat with me." I awoke from the odd stupor and remembered my manners. "Erato, didn't you say your grandmother liked to travel the world?" "This is her, Grandma Ria," Erato said. "I inherited her love of travel, and back in the day she was quite the chef. You should have tasted her lamb and honey dishes." Her smile beamed as she said, "I can't believe you remember that silly trick. Ash, would you like to see the pictures of where I've traveled? I've practiced yoga in some of the most beautiful spots on the planet. Let me show you some of them. She stood between us, hooking her arms in ours, and led us out of the red and gold room. A private usher led us to the theater box and made sure we had the right amount of chairs and a couple of small tables. Outside the theater box was a flat screen with a scrolling list in Italian. I assumed it advertised Italian products, and a couple of lists I assumed were coming attractions to the theater. Even though the opera season was ending, they had to have other events like concerts and plays to bring the money in. Our usher brought us an antipasto tray, several glasses of wine, and we watched the theater fill up with hundreds of people wearing tuxedos and evening gowns. The rich and the exuberant were in high spirits tonight. Intimidated, I let Erato take charge and stayed behind him, hiding. "Erato, Grandma, it truly is a delight," some guy said. Except this guy looked like an older version of Erato. He balanced a wine glass in one hand and sort of gave an effective wave with the other. His hair was golden, as were his eyes, somehow made brighter by his black tux and dark red bow tie. His right ear had a gold earring of a pair of ballet slippers. Erato slowly turned, and his smile seemed a little forced. "Terry, I haven't seen you since forever." The man stepped forward to give Erato a stiff hug and said, "You've stayed hidden. Word is you have a new project. Pity how the last one ended. What was his name? Andrew, Andy, Angel. Doesn't matter. You have my condolences. So is this the new him? Introduce us." I stiffened. Grandma folded my arm in hers and patted my hand. What was Terry talking about? I was a project? What did Terry mean by condolences? I'd heard of Terry, the gossip of the family and second oldest of the 9 brothers. Evidently, the one who liked to stir up drama, and he was friends with Cal, the eldest brother, who is also the control freak. Erato stepped aside and said, "Terry, I'd like you to meet Ash, my boyfriend." It sounded innocent enough, so I gave a polite smile and said, "A pleasure. So you're one of Erato's older brothers." "And Terry is an accomplished dancer," Grandma said. "He's worked with all the greats in both theater and in Hollywood." "Wow," I said. "Who have you worked with? Anybody I've heard of?" "Don't give him an opening," Erato said. "Terry will talk all night." "And the opera is about to begin," Grandma said. Terry smiled a little, looked at me, and said, "We'll have a long talk later." To which Erato rolled his eyes. Once Terry was gone, Erato quickly whispered, "You have to be careful around Terry. Nothing is private. Anything you tell him is immediately told to everybody else. He has a side business selling secrets. The juicier, the better." Once again we took our seats, Erato and I sitting side by side. According to my phone, we had 3 minutes until the show started. That is, until another commotion erupted outside our box. "Sir," a woman's voice pleaded, "you need to be back on stage." "Wrong," a baritone said, almost singing. "Family is more important. Grandma, is it true you came?" His presence radiated like the star he was, dressed in the finery of an opera costume, with elaborate makeup applied to his face to accentuate his features. This man could be no other than the opera star, Paolo de Lucia. A tall man, he had let his paunch grow until he was a big man as well. His eyes twinkled as he burst into our box. Those who could see into our box suddenly chittered and pointed. No doubt jealous because the star of the opera world deigned to visit us. We looked no different than the others here, but the star had stopped the show to visit us. "Sir," the woman said, "the show. If we start late, you'll get bad reviews." It didn't matter. The large man easily flipped Grandma's chair around and hugged her. I looked at Erato's smiling face. "He calls her Grandma?" I asked. "Everybody calls her that," he said, and shrugged. Paolo released the woman and looked about the box. Erato. Ah, nephew this time. And who is your client now? Ash, I said. A lovely name, he said, and suddenly turned his full attention on me. Perhaps you could tell me about yourself. Say, over dinner? Erato stepped between me and his uncle and said, Uncle, he's my boyfriend. Of course, dear nephew, Paolo said with a smile. My apologies. Sir, the woman said, and pulled Paolo away from us. Now. The great presence of Paolo de Lucia was gone. Had I been holding my breath this entire time? A minute later, the orchestra began playing the overture. The theater had 4 rows of private boxes surrounding the normal seating. Royalty and the rich filled each box. I had never seen so many jewels, or so many famous people in one space ever. It was like watching the Academy Awards, with stars and dignitaries and tuxedos and fine gowns everywhere. The rich got a chance to show off, and they took advantage of it. Whatever Erato had done to bring me a tuxedo as fine as this one had been worth it. I took hold of Erato's hand as the orchestra played, and 10 people performed some type of introductory dance number. Carefully, I leaned in close and asked, Who's Andrew? Grandma waved her fingers, and a stillness settled about us. Was she casting a spell? She crooked a smile, reached into her purse, and pulled out a set of opera glasses. Andrew's a former client, Erato whispered. This man had made me feel special, as if I were the only person important in his life. That was silly of me. Even if he wasn't related somehow to Eratosthenes of the Great Library, why would I expect Erato to have never had a boyfriend before? Was I jealous? I had had boyfriends before, and had even recently broken up with one. You'll have to tell me about Andrew, I whispered back. He squeezed my hand and scooted his chair a little closer to mine. Sound seemed to fade, and it was as if we were alone together. Grandma's spell, no doubt. A family of wizards. What was I getting myself into? Erato looked at me with a kind of desperation about his eyes and whispered, Before I tell you about Andrew, there is something you need to understand about me. What? I asked. Though Erato sat next to me, he shifted. He wasn't a he, not anymore. Though he wore the tuxedo, it also had shifted. His sandy hair was styled a little bit different. Delicate makeup outlined his features, and Erato smiled. That is, she smiled, as she said. I shift gender depending on the client's preference. For you, I'm a man. For Andrew, I'm a woman. I stared at Erato's eyes. The same caring note in her voice, the same strength about her hand. Somehow, my Erato, because he was a wizard, could shift into a woman? Or was it a woman who shifted into a man? And then it was Erato, my boyfriend sitting next to me. And he quietly said, Does this change things between us? You're a chameleon, I said, expecting the moment to become awkward. Which is the real you? I don't know, Erato said, looking down a moment. But my feelings for you are real. This gender shift should surprise me. It didn't. For about 3 seconds, it was awkward. Erato became the perfect boyfriend or girlfriend, as was needed by the client. Was I only a client to him? I think I was beginning to love him, but did he feel the same about me? Erato stared at me, a sincere longing in his eyes. I needed to ask what we were to each other, if we had more than a short-term future together. Did he like me as much as I liked him? No wonder he needed his private space, lost somewhere between the world of the flat screens. Paolo stepped on stage, his presence commanding the entire theater. His powerful voice was resounding to every corner, and it even overwhelmed Grandma's spell. The man knew how to control an audience. Was he a wizard too? No doubt he was. Before I could ask Erato any of my questions, a gunshot interrupted the beautiful music. Then a second shot rang out. Both shots aimed at the heavy man on stage. Paolo de Lucia, international opera star, singing on the final performance of the season, began bleeding from 2 holes in his chest. The music stopped. Some woman screamed. For only a second, the theater was in complete silence. The world froze as we stared at Paolo. "Air, we need you," Erato said, and pulled a key from his pocket and stuffed it into my hand. "Don't lose this. I'll find you later. Right now I need to take care of Grandma." "What?" I asked, completely confused. Erato said something in Latin. The key sparked in my hand. I could only stare as Erato flung the door to the theater box open and tossed me into the flat screen across from our opera booth. I screamed as the world spun into thousands of flat screens and shards of multi-channel chaos. The end of part 3. Part 4 will happen as soon as I write it. I'm Gio, writer and reader of this story. Thank you for sharing it with me. If you'd like more tales about gay men falling in love, please visit my channel. It's on YouTube. Gio Allred on YouTube. Peace.